The galaxy was losing. Not just battles but entire civilizations. The Void Hunters came like a storm of razors and silence, shredding worlds that spoke only in peace. Diplomacy failed. Mercy failed. Even reason failed. Then humanity stood before the Galactic Harmony Council, still smelling of gunpowder and blood from 100 wars we'd survived. And we spoke the words no one else dared. You've tried talking. Now let us show you how to burn the dark. The peaceful alliance fouls. The grand chamber of the Galactic Harmony Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal, its walls alive with shifting patterns of light that reflected the emotions of its inhabitants. For 700 years, this place had been the beating heart of galactic civilization, where 12 different species had gathered to solve conflicts through words rather than weapons. Today, those walls pulsed with colors of fear and desperation. Chancellor Vexai of the Ethereal Collective stood at the center podium, her translucent form flickering with anxiety. Around her, representatives from across the galaxy sat in stunned silence as holographic displays showed the devastation spreading through their territories. The images were always the same: once thriving worlds reduced to hollow shells, their resources stripped away, their populations either consumed or converted into mechanical servants. The Void Hunters have taken the Meridian Sector, Vex announced, her voice carrying the harmonic frequencies that marked her species. That brings their total conquest to 47 systems in just 3 months. At this rate, they will reach the core worlds within a year. A collective shudder ran through the chamber. The Void Hunters were not a species anyone had ever seen before. 3 months ago, they appeared from the dark spaces between galaxies, their massive ships emerging from dimensional rifts like mechanical leviathans. No one knew where they came from or what drove them, only that they consumed everything in their path with methodical efficiency. Ambassador Kethmore of the Silicon Builders, his crystalline form crackling with nervous energy, rose from his seat. We must continue our attempts at communication. Every species can be reasoned with. The Universal Translator has been broadcasting our peaceful intentions across all frequencies. Peaceful intentions? Scoffed General Thorak of the warrior clans, his massive frame bristling with barely contained aggression. We have tried peace for 3 months while they devour our worlds. When will we admit that some enemies cannot be reasoned with? The debate that followed had become tragically familiar. The Harmony Council had been built on the principle that all conflicts could be resolved through understanding and compromise. War was considered a relic of primitive thinking, something that advanced civilizations had evolved beyond. The very structure of their society depended on this belief. But the Void Hunters did not seem to care about their philosophical evolution. In the observer section, 2 figures sat quietly, taking in the heated discussion with calculating eyes. Admiral Sarah Chen of the human colonial fleet was a small woman by the standards of most galactic species, but her presence commanded attention. Beside her, Captain Marcus Webb studied the tactical displays with the focused intensity of a predator. They were the newest addition to the Harmony Council, representing a species that had only made contact with galactic civilization 15 years ago. They're going to debate until there's nothing left to defend, Webb whispered to his superior. Chen nodded grimly. 1,200 years of peace made them forget how to fight. They don't even remember how to think like their enemies. The humans had been observers in the council for most of their membership, their suggestions dismissed as remnants of their primitive past. Most species saw them as barely civilized warmongers who had somehow stumbled into space travel. The fact that they had arrived via generation ships, having fought their way across the void in vessels that were essentially flying weapons platforms, only reinforced this impression. But those same weapons platforms were starting to look more practical with each Void Hunter victory. We could reach the Meridian Sector in 2 weeks, Webb continued quietly. Set up defensive positions, force them to come to us instead of letting them choose their battles. And when was the last time anyone here listened to human tactical advice? Chen replied. They think we're bloodthirsty savages who solve everything with violence. The debate continued for hours, cycling through the same arguments they had been having since the invasion began. Diplomatic overtures, cultural exchanges, peace offerings, attempts to understand the Void Hunters' motivations, everything, except the one solution that humans had suggested from the beginning: fight back with everything they had. By the time the session ended, 3 more systems had fallen. As the various representatives filed out, Chancellor Vexai approached the human delegation. Her ethereal form shimmered with what Chen had learned to recognize as barely controlled panic. Admiral Chen Vexai said, her voice carrying harmonics of desperation, I know your species has experience with more aggressive solutions, but surely you understand that we cannot simply abandon our principles. We are civilized beings. Chen stood slowly, her dark eyes meeting the Chancellor's shifting gaze. Civilization is a luxury you can only afford when you're strong enough to defend it. The Void Hunters don't care about your principles, Chancellor. They care about converting your worlds into resources and your populations into slaves. But there must be another way, Vexai insisted. Violence only begets more violence. We have built our entire society on the premise that intelligent beings can find peaceful solutions to any conflict. Captain Webb stepped forward, his scarred face a testament to humanity's more violent past. What happens to that premise when one side refuses to participate in it? The Void Hunters aren't trying to communicate with you, they're trying to erase you. The Chancellor's form flickered uncertainly. Perhaps we need more time to understand their motivations. Every species has something that drives them, some need that can be fulfilled through negotiation. Time is what we don't have, Chen said bluntly, and their motivation is clear. They want your resources and your worlds. The question is whether you're going to let them take them. Before Vexai could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. Emergency lights bathed the crystal walls in harsh red illumination as communication officers rushed to their stations. The large central display activated, showing a real-time view of the Zarian system, home to the Council's largest military academy. The Void Hunter fleet had arrived early. The display showed massive, mechanical ships emerging from dimensional rifts, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that defied understanding. They moved with perfect coordination, like cells in a vast organism, converging on the Academy world with ruthless efficiency. "Deploy the defense fleet," ordered General Thorak, his warrior instincts finally overriding the Council's peaceful protocols. "Already dispatched," came the reply from the communications officer. Admiral Zethkar is leading the first combined fleet to intercept. Chen and Webb watched grimly as the battle unfolded on the display. The combined fleet was an impressive sight. Ships from 6 different species working in coordination, their diverse technologies creating a colorful light show against the stars. For a brief moment, it looked like they might actually succeed in driving off the invaders. Then the Void Hunters opened fire. The weapons they used were unlike anything in the galactic arsenal. Beams of pure energy that seemed to unravel matter at the molecular level. Projectiles that phased through shields as if they didn't exist. And most terrifying of all, devices that simply made ships disappear from existence entirely. The combined fleet lasted 18 minutes. The chamber fell silent as the tactical display showed the aftermath. Debris fields where proud vessels had fought and died. Escape pods fleeing toward the outer system. And the Void Hunter fleet advancing on the Academy world with mechanical precision. 200,000 students, whispered Ambassador Keth, cadets from every species in the Council. They watched helplessly as the Void Hunters began their work. Massive mining ships emerged from their fleet, descending on the planet like metal vultures. Within hours, they would strip the world bare, converting its resources into more ships, more weapons, more tools of conquest. Chancellor Vexai turned to Admiral Chen, her ethereal form now pulsing with desperate hope. "Your species, you have experience with this kind of warfare. What would you do?" Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical display. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of hard-won experience. "First, I'd stop thinking like a civilized being. The Void Hunters aren't playing by your rules, so following those rules will only get you killed." "What do you mean?" "You're fighting a defensive war, reacting to their moves instead of making your own. You're trying to preserve your civilized standards while they're focused solely on victory, and most importantly, you're fighting the war you want to fight instead of the war you need to fight." Webb nodded grimly. "They're predictable because they're mechanical. They follow patterns, optimize for efficiency, minimize risk, but that also means they don't adapt well to chaos. 2 strategies that don't make sense by their logic." "Are you suggesting we abandon our principles entirely?" asked General Thorak. Chen met his gaze steadily. "I'm suggesting that dead civilizations don't have principles. The Void Hunters are counting on your unwillingness to do what's necessary. They've probably faced dozens of civilizations just like yours, species that valued their ideals more than their survival." The truth of her words hung in the air like a challenge. Around the chamber, representatives from 12 different species grappled with a reality they had tried to avoid for 3 months. Their way of life, everything they had built, was being swept away by an enemy that didn't share their values. In the distance, alarms continued to sound as more reports came in. The Void Hunters weren't stopping at Zarian. They were pushing deeper into Council space, accelerating their timeline, pressing their advantage. While the galaxy's defenders were still reeling from their latest defeat, Chancellor Vexai's form solidified as she made a decision that would echo through galactic history. "Admiral Chen, Captain Webb, I am formally requesting that the human colonial fleet assist in our defense. Your species has the experience we clearly lack." Chen nodded slowly. "We'll help, but understand that helping means doing things your way. Hasn't worked. If you want to survive this, you need to be willing to fight like they do, without mercy, without hesitation, and without the luxury of maintaining your ideals while your enemies destroy everything you've built." The silence that followed was broken only by the steady pulse of emergency alarms. Across the galaxy, the Void Hunters continued their inexorable advance, consuming worlds and converting populations with mechanical efficiency. But in the crystal chamber of the Harmony Council, something had changed. For the first time in 700 years, the galaxy's most peaceful civilization was preparing for war, and they were about to learn that sometimes the only way to preserve what you value most is to become what you fear most. The age of peaceful diplomacy was ending. The age of human warfare was about to begin. Humanity takes command. The emergency session convened at dawn on Harmony Prime, the Council's capital world. For the first time in the Chamber's history, the beautiful crystal walls pulsed with colors of war, deep crimsons and burning oranges that reflected the assembled species' growing desperation. The Void Hunters had taken 6 more systems overnight, their mechanical efficiency making a mockery of every defensive strategy the Council had attempted. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the assembled representatives, her human uniform a stark contrast to the flowing robes and organic forms around her. Behind her, a massive holographic display showed the current state of the galaxy, nearly 30% of Council space now marked in the ominous red of Void Hunter occupation. In the past 72 hours, we've lost more territory than in the previous month combined, Chen began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had fought real wars. The Void Hunters have adapted to your defensive patterns. They know how you think, how you react, how you deploy your forces. Every battle you fight the same way makes them stronger and you weaker. Chancellor Vex High's ethereal form flickered with barely contained anxiety. What do you propose, Admiral? Our combined fleets have thrown everything at them. No, Webb interjected from beside his superior. You've thrown everything at them the way you've always fought battles. Organized formations, predictable tactics, trying to minimize casualties while maximizing honor. The Void Hunters don't care about honor, and they're not trying to minimize anything except their own resource expenditure. The chamber erupted in voices of protest. Ambassador Kethmore's crystalline form crackled with indignation. Are you suggesting we abandon our military traditions, our codes of conduct? These principles have guided us for centuries. Chen's expression hardened. Your codes of conduct are getting your people killed. The Zarian Academy had 200,000 cadets. How many of them survived because you fought honorably? The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the chamber knew the answer. Fewer than 3,000 had escaped the planet before the Void Hunters completed their harvest. General Thorak of the warrior clans, perhaps the only representative who understood military necessity, stood slowly. What exactly are you proposing? Human. Chen activated the holographic display, showing fleet movements and tactical scenarios, complete operational command of all military forces. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier. We fight this war the way wars are actually won, by making the enemy afraid to face us. Impossible, declared Ambassador Lyslin of the Peaceful Collective. No single species can command the combined forces of the Council. It violates every principle of cooperative governance. Your principles of cooperative governance just cost you the entire Outer Rim, Webb said bluntly. The Void Hunters are 11 systems away from the core worlds. At their current rate of advance, they'll be at Harmony Prime in 6 weeks. How many principles will be left when they're stripping this planet for resources? Chancellor Vexai raised her hand for silence, her form pulsing with the effort of containing her fear. Admiral Chen, if we were to grant you this authority, what assurance do we have that your methods will work? Chen met her gaze steadily. None, but I can guarantee that what you're doing now will fail. The Void Hunters have conquered civilizations. Before, probably dozens of them. They know how civilized species fight, how they think, how they limit themselves. They're counting on you to keep being civilized while they destroy you. And what would you do differently? Asked General Thorak. Webb stepped forward to answer. First, we stop playing defense. The Void Hunters choose when and where to attack. Because you're always reacting to their moves. We start hitting their supply lines, their occupied worlds, their forward positions. Make them react to us for a change. Second, Chen continued, we stop trying to preserve every ship and every life. Wars are won by being willing to sacrifice for victory. The Void Hunters understand this. They'll sacrifice entire fleets. If it gains them a strategic advantage, until you're willing to do the same, you'll keep losing. Third, we start thinking like them. They're machines, which means they optimize for efficiency and predictability. So we become unpredictable. We hit them where they don't expect, with tactics they haven't seen, using strategies that don't make sense by their logic. The debate that followed was intense and emotional. Representatives argued about the morality of human military tactics, the wisdom of abandoning their traditional approaches, and the risks of trusting their survival to a species many still saw as primitive warriors. But the debate was cut short by another alarm. The central display activated to show the Kronos system, home to the Council's primary shipyards. The Void Hunter fleet had arrived 3 days ahead of their projected schedule, and they weren't alone. The mechanical ships were accompanied by vessels of unfamiliar design, captured and converted ships from previously conquered civilizations. They're using our own technology against us, whispered Ambassador Kethmore. Ships from the Silicon Builders, weapon systems from the warrior clans, even some designs I don't recognize. Chen studied the display grimly. Every species they've conquered has given them new capabilities. They're not just destroying civilizations, they're absorbing them, learning from them, becoming stronger with each victory. The battle for Kronos unfolded with terrible predictability. The Council's Third Fleet fought bravely, their commanders following established tactical doctrines and rules of engagement. The Void Hunters responded with devastating efficiency. Their captured vessels used as suicide ships, while their main fleet picked off the defenders with mechanical precision. The shipyard fell in 4 hours. Chancellor Vexai turned to Admiral Chen, her ethereal form now steady with desperate resolve. You have command all forces, all resources, all authority. Save what's left of our civilization. Chen nodded grimly. Captain Webb will coordinate fleet operations. I'll need immediate access to all military databases, troop deployments, and industrial capacity reports. And I need every commanding officer in the galaxy to understand that their old ways of thinking just died with the Kronos fleet. The transformation began immediately. Webb took command of the emergency response, issuing orders that would have been unthinkable under the old system. Instead of rushing to defend the next predicted target, he scattered the remaining fleets across seemingly random positions. Instead of concentrating forces for maximum firepower, he divided them into small, fast-moving squadrons. Most shocking of all, he began ordering attacks on Void Hunter-occupied worlds. You're sending ships to attack established positions, protested General Thorak. That's suicide. The Void Hunters will have had time to fortify, to prepare defenses. Fortification is a weakness, Webb explained, studying the tactical displays. It means committing resources to a fixed position. The Void Hunters are machines. They think in terms of efficiency and optimization. They won't expect us to waste ships on attacks that can't succeed. The first human-led operation targeted a recently captured mining world in the Vega sector. Instead of a frontal assault, Webb sent a small squadron of the fastest ships in the fleet with a simple mission: cause as much damage as possible before retreating. The attack lasted only 20 minutes, but its effects rippled across the entire Void Hunter network. For the first time since the invasion began, they had been forced to divert resources to defend their rear positions. Supply convoys, that had been moving freely now required escort fleets. Harvesting operations had to be suspended while new defensive positions were established. It's working, Chancellor Vexai observed, watching the reports come in. They're slowing down. More than that, Chen replied. They're confused. Machines don't handle uncertainty well, and we just introduced a variable they didn't account for. Watch how they respond to the next attack. The second operation was even more unconventional. Webb sent a damaged freighter filled with mining charges directly into a Void Hunter fleet formation. The ship's crew evacuated at the last moment, leaving the vessel to detonate in the middle of the enemy formation. The explosion destroyed 3 Void Hunter vessels and damaged a dozen more. But more importantly, it forced them to completely revise their tactical algorithms. Ships that had previously moved with perfect coordination now maintained defensive spacing. Fleets that had advanced in optimal formation now moved cautiously, scanning for threats that might not exist. But the real change was happening in the Council species themselves, seeing their enemies vulnerable for the first time in months. Volunteer crews began stepping forward for increasingly dangerous missions. The warrior clans embraced the human tactics with enthusiastic brutality. Even the peaceful, ethereal collective began contributing to what they called asymmetric engagement protocols. Within 2 weeks, the tide of the war had shifted dramatically. The Void Hunters' advance had stalled as they struggled to adapt to human unpredictability. Their efficient resource gathering was disrupted by constant raids. Most importantly, their psychological advantage had been broken, but the cost was mounting. The human approach to warfare demanded sacrifices that galactic civilization had never been asked to make. Entire squadrons were lost in suicide attacks. Worlds were abandoned to by time for evacuations. Moral compromises were made in the name of survival. Captain Webb stood in the Fleet Command Center, studying casualty reports that would have been unthinkable under the old system. Admiral Chen approached, her expression grim. 1,600 ships, lost in the past week, she said, quietly. That's more than the Council lost in the previous century of conflicts combined. Webb nodded. And in return, we've stopped the Void Hunters' advance and started taking back territory. The question is whether the Council species can handle what we're asking them to become. The answer came sooner than expected. A delegation of representatives led by Ambassador Lysine confronted Chen in the command center, their faces showing the strain of watching their civilization transform. Admiral Lysine began. We appreciate your success in halting the invasion, but we must discuss the methods being employed. The casualty rates, the abandoned worlds, the brutality of some operations. This isn't the civilization we're trying to preserve. Chun looked up from her tactical displays, her expression hard. No, it isn't. The civilization you're trying to preserve was dying. What you have now is a civilization that might actually survive. At what cost? Lysine demanded. When this war ends, will we even recognize what we've become? When this war ends, Chen replied, you'll be alive to ask that question. That's more than I can say for the civilizations the Void Hunters have already consumed. The uncomfortable truth of her words settled over the chamber. Around them, the business of war continued. Casualty reports, resource allocations, tactical updates. All the machinery of survival that had been foreign to galactic civilization just weeks before. But as the reports came in, from the front lines, one thing was becoming clear. Humanity's ruthless approach was working. The Void Hunters were no longer the unstoppable force they had seemed. For the first time since the invasion began, the galaxy had hope. Whether that hope was worth the price they were paying remained to be seen. The price of survival, the final phase of the war, began on a cold morning in the Harmony Prime Command Center. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the largest tactical display ever assembled, showing the real-time positions of every remaining fleet in the galaxy. After 3 months of human-led operations, the strategic picture had changed dramatically. The Void Hunters still controlled vast territories, but their advance had not only stopped, it had reversed. Captain Marcus Webb approached with the latest intelligence reports, his expression grim but determined. Long-range reconnaissance confirms it, Admiral. The Void Hunters are consolidating all remaining forces at the Nexus Point. They're preparing for one final push. Chen studied the display, where thousands of red dots marked the largest concentration of enemy forces ever assembled. The Nexus Point was a gravitational anomaly that allowed faster-than-light travel to multiple sectors simultaneously. Control it, and you could strike anywhere in the galaxy within days. How many ships are we looking at? She asked. Conservative estimate, 8,000 vessels, including captured ships from at least 30 different civilizations. They've been calling in every force from their occupied territories. Around them, the command center buzzed with activity, as officers from a dozen species worked with an efficiency that would have been impossible before the war. The changes went deeper than just tactics and strategy. The gentle ethereal collective now served alongside the brutal warrior clans. The intellectual silicon builders coordinated with the emotional empathic healers. Humanity's approach to warfare had forced them all to evolve beyond their traditional limitations. Chancellor Vexhai materialized beside Chen, her ethereal form more solid than it had been in months. War, it seemed, had given even the most peaceful species a new kind of strength. Admiral, she said, the Council has voted. We're prepared to commit every remaining ship to this final battle. Win or lose, we end this here. Chen nodded, studying the tactical projections. Understand what you're asking for, Chancellor. This won't be a battle in any traditional sense. We'll be throwing everything we have at an enemy that's had months to prepare. The casualties will be— She paused, searching for words adequate to the scope of what they were planning. Unprecedented, Webb finished quietly. We're talking about the largest space battle in recorded history. Most of the crews out there won't be coming home. The weight of that statement settled over the command center. In the months since humanity had taken control of the war effort, they had asked the galaxy's species to make sacrifices that would have been unthinkable in peacetime. Entire worlds had been evacuated and abandoned. Ancient codes of military honor had been discarded in favor of brutal effectiveness. Young beings who had grown up in a peaceful galaxy had been asked to fight and die with the ruthless determination of their most primitive ancestors. But it had worked. The Void Hunters, for all their mechanical efficiency, had never faced an enemy willing to match their ruthlessness. There's something else, Webb continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Our intelligence suggests the Void Hunters aren't just consolidating for a final push, they're preparing to retreat. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the command center. The idea that the seemingly unstoppable invasion force might actually be considering withdrawal was almost too extraordinary to believe. Retreat to where? Asked General Thorak, his warrior instincts immediately suspicious. Webb activated a new display showing the dark space beyond the galactic rim. Back to wherever they came from. Our analysts believe they've concluded that conquering this galaxy would cost more resources than it would provide. We've made the war too expensive for them. Chen felt a moment of satisfaction, but it was tempered by hard-won experience. Which means this final battle isn't about conquest anymore. It's about making sure they can't come back. They'll try to inflict maximum damage before withdrawing, hoping to leave us to weaken to pursue or defend against a future invasion. The tactical implications were staggering. The Void Hunters would fight not for victory but for mutual destruction, willing to spend every ship they had if it meant crippling galactic civilization permanently. How do we fight an enemy that's already planning to lose? Asked Ambassador. Wrote the same way we've been fighting them, Chen replied. By being willing to pay a price they can't calculate. Captain Webb, initiate Operation Endgame. What followed was the most complex military mobilization in galactic history. Every ship that could fly, every weapon that could fire, every trained crew that could fight was committed to the final assault. The fleet that assembled at the rally point dwarfed anything previously imagined. Representatives from every species in the Council, flying in formations that mixed technologies and tactics in unprecedented ways. But the most shocking element of the plan was humanity's final contribution to the war effort. Captain Webb stood before the assembled fleet commanders, his scarred face illuminated by the glow of the tactical displays. Behind him, Admiral Chen watched with an expression that mixed pride and terrible sadness. Operation Endgame requires a sacrifice that goes beyond anything we've asked before, Webb began. The Void Hunters have prepared for every conventional attack. They expect us to value our ships, our crews, our resources, so we're going to give them something they can't prepare for. He activated a display showing the human battle plan. Gasps echoed through the command center as the assembled officers realized what they were looking at. The human fleet will serve. As the spearhead web continued, we'll punch through their defenses and clear a path to their command vessels. Once we've created the opening, the main fleet will exploit the breach and destroy their leadership structure. General Thorak leaned forward, his expression troubled. Captain, that plan shows the human ships penetrating to the center of their formation. The casualties would be ... double quotes total. Webb finished. The human fleet won't be coming back from this operation. We know that. We've accepted it. The silence that followed was profound. The species that had once dismissed humans as primitive warmongers now faced the reality that these same humans were prepared to sacrifice themselves entirely for galactic survival. Chancellor Vexai's form flickered with emotions, too complex for her species' usual harmonics. Admiral Chen, surely there must be another way. To ask your entire species to make such a sacrifice. Chen stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's decision. Chancellor, 3 months ago, you asked us to save your civilization. This is how we save it. By doing what civilized species can't do, by being willing to pay any price for victory. The battle began 18 hours later. The combined fleet emerged from hyperspace at the nexus point to find the Void Hunters. Waiting in a formation that spoke of mechanical perfection, their ships were arranged in concentric spheres, each layer designed to maximize defensive efficiency while maintaining offensive capability. For a moment, both fleets held position, as if even the machines recognized the historical significance of what was about to unfold. Then Admiral Chen gave the order that would echo through galactic history. All ships, commence attack. Show them what we've learned about war. The human fleet struck first, their ships moving with the reckless courage that had become their trademark. They didn't attempt to preserve themselves or maintain formation. Instead, they threw themselves at the Void Hunter defenses with the single-minded determination of beings who had already accepted death. Captain Webb's flagship led the charge, its weapons firing continuously as it carved through the enemy formation. Around him, human vessels exploded in brilliant flashes of light, their crews selling their lives for each meter of advance. Breach in Sector 7, reported the communications officer, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. The ethereal fleet is advancing through the gap. On the main display, Admiral Chen watched as the plan unfolded exactly as projected. The human sacrifice had created the opening the main fleet needed, but the cost was everything she had feared. Ship after ship disappeared from the tactical display, each one representing hundreds of lives lost. But their sacrifice was not in vain. The combined fleet poured through the breach, their diverse technologies and tactics overwhelming the Void Hunters' defensive algorithms. For the first time in the war, it was the machines that seemed confused and disorganized. The turning point came when Captain Webb's heavily damaged flagship reached the Void Hunter command vessel. Instead of attempting to disable it, he made a choice that embodied everything humanity had brought to the war. All remaining power to engines, he ordered. Ram them. The collision destroyed both ships in a flash of nuclear fire, but it also severed the central command node that coordinated the entire Void Hunter fleet. Without their mechanical precision, the invasion force began to crumble. Admiral Chen watched from the command center as the tide of battle shifted decisively. The Void Hunters, faced with the choice between mutual annihilation and withdrawal, chose retreat. Their surviving ships began falling back toward the dimensional rifts that had brought them to the galaxy. But even in retreat, they followed their programming to inflict maximum damage. Suicide attacks destroyed dozens of Council ships. Entire sectors were scorched with weapons that rendered them uninhabitable for generations. When the battle finally ended, the tactical display showed a galaxy forever changed. The Void Hunters were gone, but the cost of victory was staggering. Of the 8,000 ships that had entered battle, fewer than 3,000 remained. Entire species had been reduced to a handful of survivors. The human fleet had been completely annihilated. In the aftermath, Chancellor Vexai stood in the ruins of the command center, surrounded by the debris of galactic civilization. Admiral Chen, one of the few human survivors, approached her with a report that would reshape their understanding of victory. Casualty reports, Chancellor, Chen said quietly. Total military losses exceed 60%. Civilian casualties are still being calculated, but we estimate over 200 billion beings died in this war. Vexai's ethereal form pulsed with grief and the cost of this victory. What have we become? Chen looked out at the stars, where the debris of the great battle still glowed against the darkness. We've become survivors. The question now is whether we can live with what we had to do to survive. The years that followed would be known as the Age of Rebuilding, but also as the Age of Reckoning. The galaxy had to come to terms with what it had learned about itself, that when faced with extinction, even the most peaceful civilizations could embrace methods they had once considered unthinkable. Schools taught the history of the Void Hunter War, but they also taught its lessons about the price of survival. Monuments were built to honor those who had died, but also to remind future generations of what they had been willing to sacrifice. And in the quiet moments between ceremonies and speeches, beings across the galaxy asked themselves the same question that haunted Admiral Chen in her final years. Was preserving civilization worth becoming something else entirely? The answer, like the scars left by the war, would never fully heal. But the galaxy endured. And perhaps, in the end, that was what mattered most. The Void Hunters never returned. Whether they had been destroyed, discouraged, or simply moved on to easier prey, no one knew. But the dimensional rifts remained monitored, and the lessons of the war were never forgotten. Humanity's sacrifice had saved the galaxy, but it had also changed it forever. The peaceful ideals that had guided galactic civilization for centuries had been tested in the crucible of survival and found both necessary and insufficient. The new galaxy that emerged from the ashes was harder, more pragmatic, more willing to face uncomfortable truths, but it was also more unified, bound together by shared sacrifice and the knowledge that survival sometimes required abandoning everything you thought you were. Admiral Sarah Chen died at the age of 91, one of the last survivors of the war that had redefined civilization itself. Her final words, spoken to a gathering of young officers from across the galaxy, became the unofficial motto of the new military academies. Never forget what we were. Never forget what we became. And never let anyone force you to choose between them again. The galaxy had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the only way to preserve what you value most is to be willing to sacrifice everything for it. It was a lesson written in the blood of heroes and the ashes of worlds, carved into the collective memory of species that had faced extinction and chosen to endure. And in the vast darkness between galaxies, other civilizations watched and wondered if they, too, would have the strength to pay such a price when their time came to choose between survival and surrender. The universe, after all, was full of predators. But now it knew that some prey would bite back with a ferocity that even the hunters could not predict or survive. The Eon D. If you liked this story, please like it and leave your feedback in the comments. Subscribe for more stories.